Welcome everybody to another Motocross Action video. This time we are testing the 2023 Suzuki RMZ250. This bike is unchanged for the new model season, but we are very happy that Suzuki gave us another bike. They're continuing to produce motocross models, and they're actually here at the track with us today, trying to make a push and trying to show us that they're serious about motocross bikes and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So the RMZ250, it was updated in 2019, received frame changes, engine changes, more updates than people remember. So we're gonna talk about those updates in this video, talk about how this bike works on the track. We got MXA test rider Brian Medeiros, who qualified for 2 Pro Nationals, Washougal, and the second Pala National on the Suzuki RMZ250, our test bike from last year. So now we got a fresh one. We're gonna throw Brian on it today. We're gonna tell you guys all we know about this bike. It's not the fastest, it's not the lightest, and it definitely doesn't have the best suspension, but it's a price point model that a lot of our riders actually appreciate more than you might think. All right guys, good day of testing on the RMZ250. In this video, we're gonna break it all down for you, and I had to bring on MXA's resident Suzuki test rider, Brian Medeiros. Brian qualified for 2 Pro Nationals this year on a Suzuki RMZ250, and incredibly, the thing was very, very stock. So this video wouldn't be complete if he wasn't the one riding the bike today, and if we didn't throw him on to talk about the bike today. So Suzuki, they did not update the RMZ250 for 2023, and we always get lots of comments. People either love Suzuki and are begging Suzuki to keep producing motocross bikes, to keep coming back to the races, to supporting their teams like BarX Suzuki and HEP Suzuki. We got people that are all on board with the RM Army, or we get comments from people that hate Suzuki, that complain about it, that wish that they would just go away, that have all kinds of negative things to say about Suzuki. So we had a good time with them today. Unfortunately, no, they didn't update this bike, so we know a lot about it because it's exactly the same as last year's bike was. Quite a bit of pros about this bike, quite a bit of things that we like. Brian tests all of our bikes. He's not just a Suzuki test rider, but he actually gravitates to the Suzuki quite a bit, and he's taken it to the highest level and been successful on it. So how was it today riding a fresh Suzuki 250 after you've been riding our last year's bike and you even bought your own? So putting a lot of time on your bikes, what was it like to jump on a brand new one today?
Riding a fresh bike's always cool. Yes, they didn't update it. Yes, it's a little slower than all the other bikes, but it's still a fun bike to ride. For the average person, I think it's plenty enough power to get yourself around the track and not get you in trouble. Yeah, the forks are still stiff, shock is still stiff, but if you go really fast, they work really well. But for the average consumer, I believe it's still a little too stiff.
One big talking point with the Suzuki is the price point of this bike. It retails for $7,899, but Brian was mentioning you went to buy a bike last year, yep, and retail price is quite a bit below that. What were you getting bikes at?
Yeah, last year I went and bought a Suzuki RMZ250, and I paid $6,500 for it. Probably one of the best deals I could have came across. And after riding it stock for a little bit, raced at Washougal, completely stock. Took my engine to Chad at XPR, put about 2,000 bucks into the engine, just cleaned up the head, did a piston, and put some good gas in it, Vortex.
Yep, so bone stock racing at Washougal, racing on the bone stock RMZ250, then modded it out, raced it at the Pala 2 National, and both times put it in the show. So good stuff for MXA, because we like seeing an orange helmet in the show, and good stuff for Suzuki, seeing their bike racing in a fairly stock form goes to show you just how capable this bike is. So overall today, talking about the horsepower, it is down on this bike. 39 horsepower is what it puts out on the dyno, and that's about 5 horsepower off of the top running KTM and Kawasaki 254 stroke engines and Yamaha as well. So quite a bit down on power, but where the Suzuki makes its money is really in the low end grunt and the low end power that it has coming off the crack of the throttle, coming out of corners. We talked to Jamie Ellis, he does Twisted Development, and he builds all the engines for the Bar X Suzuki team, and he was able to get so much power out of the bottom end for their bikes that he actually went searching for more power on the other bikes that he builds, like the Yamahas, the Kawis, and the Hondas. Jamie Ellis, he was able to get some impressive power. I actually got to ride Dylan Schwartz RMZ250. You can check out that full test on motocrossactionmag.com or that full video on our YouTube channel as well. That bike was very, very impressive, and I was also impressed with how stock that bike was. It had stock engine mounts, stock triple clamps, very stiff suspension because they were racing outdoor nationals on it, and an engine that was extremely fast and extremely strong off the bottom end. So that's one thing today. Bone stock bike, yes, it is quite a bit slower than the rest of the bikes, but I was actually able to lug it in third gear today and maintain that around the corners, where that's pretty hard to do even on the KTM, the Kawi, and the Honda, and even the Yamahas. There are pros and cons to the Suzuki RMZ250. Brian, maybe you could talk a little bit about this. Once you fix a couple issues, it can be a great bike and still a good price point buy. So what would you say somebody would have to do to keep the price point low? Because if you buy a bike for $6,500 but spend thousands of dollars on suspension and engine mods, well, you really should have just bought a KTM or a Yamaha or a Kawi in the first place. There's no reason to save money on the bike but then spend money hopping it up. Then you just end up back to where KTM is stock. If somebody wants to buy a bike at a fairly reasonable price, what are some cheap mods they can do to make it better?
For me, I felt like the Suzuki, it doesn't need very much, like as far as engine work wise, to get it to where it's a funner bike to ride, a more competitive bike on a local level. What I would recommend most is getting a Vortex ECU, get it mapped by Jamie, Chad. Also getting the suspension sprung for your weight. For me, at the Washougal National, I ran the stock valving just with springs for my weight, and it was good enough to put it in the show. So you know the Suzuki can be a competitive bike, you just got to fine tune it a little bit more to you. I also feel that yes, this bike is slow, but it gets the power that it does have to the ground a lot better than a KTM or a Husky or a steel chassis for me, being so light. Yes, it's a little bit twitchy, but it twitches the same every single time. Where a KTM, I feel like I could hit the same bump 2 or 3 times and it does 2 or 3 different things. Where the Suzuki, I can hit the bump, it kicks a certain way, and I know it's going to kick that way every single time, and I can kind of compensate for it. That's what gets overlooked a lot about the Suzuki, is that it is a stiff, rigid feeling chassis, but if you adapt to what it's doing on the track, it works great.
Suzuki also got the latest updates to this bike was in 2019 when it got the dual injectors, and it also got an updated frame that ended up being even stiffer, but that allowed them to have the center port exhaust coming out of the engine, coming out of the cylinder. So this bike updated in 2019. It's not that long ago when this bike actually got quite a few updates. It's newer than the RMZ450 is. I was impressed that Brian was able to put it in the show at Washougal Impala, and also very impressed that the Bar X Suzuki team can be as competitive as they are on it with a lot of stock components on this bike. Dylan Schwartz at the 2021 Washougal National, he finished 6th overall on a Suzuki in the 250 national class. So 6th overall is very impressive. Goes to show that this is a capable bike, and in the hands of the right rider with the right mods made to it, you can really make it work. Another couple things to note about the Suzuki RMZ250 is we've been really impressed with its durability over the last few years. This bike has been very solid. But talking more about the horsepower and talking about for the average rider who is not racing pro nationals, who's not racing top classes at Loretta's, 39 horsepower isn't such a bad thing. Yes, you're going to lose out on the starts if you're racing here at Glen Helen. Yes, you're going to lose out going up the hills, but having a little bit less horsepower is good for someone who's lighter, like Brian here, or it's good for riders who are novice level, vet level, who don't use all of the horsepower that a Yamaha YZ250F offers or a Honda CRF250 offers. This Suzuki RMZ250 power band got some strong grunt coming out of the corners, some nice torque coming out of the corners. It's an easy to ride power band, and it's overall friendly, I would say, to the average rider is a good thing. It's easier to ride, and it's not something that you're struggling to hold on to. So I would say just by softening the forks and the shock on this thing, you'd be able to be pretty happy for most novice level riders, and you get some good durability out of it. Because you're on a Suzuki, you'll get lots of looks. People either love it or hate it. Brian knows all about that.
Yeah, I definitely get a lot of questions, you know, at the tracks and stuff. Oh, how is the bike, and how do you like it? What have you done to it? But like Josh mentioned, it's got a lot of bottom end grunt. So even if you're a heavier guy, I mean, you rode it today and you felt that it had bottom end grunt.
Yep.
It's peppy, so it feels fast right off the bottom, but it's also linear power band, so you can rev it. Of course, it doesn't rev as far as the KTM, but we tried some things on it today, like the richer coupler, which the leaner usually gives it more of an aggressive throttle response. To my surprise, I ran the rich coupler, which made it a more even broader power band, let it rev higher, less shifting, which was nice down the long straightaways here at Glen Helen. Yeah, it just made it a lot easier to ride. And for someone that has to work 9 to 5, you know, 40 hours a week or whatever, this bike is plenty enough power for the average guy. You can go out, ride it at your pace all day long, and it's not going to beat you up, versus 45, 50 horsepower motorcycle that you can ride at your best when you're fresh, but when you start getting tired, it starts to get away from you a little bit.
And another point about the RMZ250 that's good to note is that this bike might be a good transition for riders coming from the 85 and the super mini classes into the 250 ranks, because it is a little lower on horsepower, because it is fairly easy to ride as far as power goes. This bike is a good transition bike. I actually rode the Suzuki RMZ250 when I was coming off. I rode Suzuki RM85s, and then I spent some time on the Suzuki RM125 for a while, that is now discontinued, before jumping to the Suzuki RMZ250. So I have some time on the yellow bikes in my past. I can assure you guys that this bike is fairly easy to ride once you fix the suspension. And although I have our resident Suzuki test rider who absolutely loves these things and spends his own money on buying a personal RMZ250 off to the side of the MXA bikes that he tests, I do have to hit it hard MXA style with the RMZ250 and give you the honest truth. Although there are a lot of pros to this bike, although we are thankful that Suzuki was here with us today, we're thankful that they're assuring us that they're not going anywhere with their motocross bikes, and we're thankful that they're continuing to press forward and move on with the motocross market. We do have to say that this bike is still the heaviest bike in the class. It still has a kickstarter. It's still the slowest bike in the class, and it still needs a lot of help in the suspension department before you can feel comfortable on this bike. I rode it today and I weigh 175, and the suspension is still super stiff for me here at Glen Helen, trying to get traction in the corners. The best way to turn this bike with the stiff suspension and the stiff valving it has is to find a berm, find something you can bank off of and pivot off of that to get traction around the corners. So Suzuki RMZ250, although Brian loves it and he rides amazing on it, and although there are a lot of pros about this bike, it's still not the best bike in the class. It's still not going to beat any of the other bikes in the MXA 250 shootout, because it's not any better than it was last year. We appreciate Suzuki coming out here today with us. We appreciate that we get to ride and race this bike for the next year. I'm looking forward to seeing what Brian Medeiros does on these bikes in the upcoming year. That's all for this video. We appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned to motocrossactionmag.com for our 2023 RMZ 450 video coming out soon, and also our 2023 Yamaha YZ 450 video that everybody's looking forward to.
overall, good day of testing here at Glen Helen. Super fun day. Thanks again to Suzuki for coming out. Be sure to stay tuned to motocrossactionmag.com for all the latest news, reviews, and bike tests, product tests. We'll catch you in the next video.